The last few months have taught us what's important in life. It's also
wherever you are, make it Truth Frequency Radio.
Welcome to Spirit's Journey, coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. Your hosts are Patrick and Kathryn Andries.
Join us each week as we explore a wide range of metaphysical topics such as dreams, astrology, intuitive readings, and life purpose. You'll receive practical guidance so that you can live your most awesome life.
Learn more about what we do at intuitiveschool.com and connect with us on Facebook at Spirit's Journey Radio. Welcome to Spirit's Journey. We are coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio, among many others, such as iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and TalkStream Live. We're here in the Heartland, holding the energy for spiritual truth and awareness. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Kathryn. I am so excited today because we have Dr. Jena Bell, who is talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is life purpose. She is a visionary purpose strategist. She's intuitive, and she's got insightful gifts that create a transformational experience for her clients and her audiences. She serves a mission to empower 1 million women around the globe to ignite their purpose, embrace their destiny, and live economically independent. That's amazing. She is also an author, international speaker, real estate investor, entrepreneur with 30 years experience in corporate and business. She is the founder and CEO of Purpose on the Rise, Your Pathways to Abundance, and the Purpose-Driven Women's Movement. She's been featured on international news programs, SABC, ENCA TV, and such. So today we are so delighted to have you, Jena.
Hi, Dr. Jena.
Thank you so much.
Well, you have done so many amazing things. Let's start at the beginning. And if you could share your story and background and how you went from 30 years in the corporate career to becoming this entrepreneur for women.
Oh, well, thank you both, Kathryn and Patrick, for having me today. I'm excited to be on your show today and to speak to your audience. And just to give you just a little background, I won't take a whole lot of time on that. But, I like to say this. I was the woman who, just like many women out there, we check all the boxes. We want to do all the right things. So we go to college, we do everything we walk that tightrope, we get that big job, we get married, and everything is supposed to just fall into place, right? And then you get there and you realize, oh my gosh, I've been rushing and rushing and rushing to get to this place that's supposed to be euphoria, this total American dream, only to realize that dream was more a nightmare, right? And it's like you're walking around and everything seems perfect, but yet on the inside, you realize that there's something missing, that somewhere along the way you've kind of missed it. Well, that was me. And it was at that point in my career, after 27 years on the job and 24 years of marriage, that I realized that I was in a place that no longer served me, both emotionally, spiritually, and so forth. And so I ended up getting the divorce. And then shortly after that, my job ended. And it was at that point that I realized now, looking back, that I was still enough to hear what I believe God had been telling me all along, that it was time for me to do something different. So I see it as a transition from to really understanding what my true purpose was. And it was when I stepped into it, I heeded it, that my life really, really changed. And yes, I was in corporate. I worked for a healthcare organization. I'd led a major program. And I will tell you, I absolutely loved it. I traveled all around the U.S. and I absolutely loved it and had great opportunities and great people. But I believe that for each of us, we have an assignment. And when those assignments are up, it's time to shift. And I was not going to shift because I was comfortable, even though I wasn't really that comfortable. but it was time for a shift. And that's when things happened and God showed me something totally different. And it's been since then that I've gone from 30 years in the corporate environment to now the last 5 years really pursuing my purpose and pursuing empowering other women to follow their purpose.
I think that's awesome, Dr. Jena. Now, one thing I wanted to circle back here before we get too far away from your story that I think is amazing and can help a lot of people. I know for myself, I got into the study of metaphysics and how the mind works while I was in college, but I've had that experience where I've gone into the corporate world because, sometimes I was only teaching part-time. And so I'd go into the corporate world. So I'd kind of have a day job to make my expenses and stuff. But then I always felt like there was something pulling me back out of it. So I never really got too deep in it or stayed in one place for too long. But I did find, looking back, it seemed like everything that I did kind of like added another little piece to the puzzle, So it's always fascinating to me hearing people's stories because you're talking about this time you spent in the corporate world. And so I was curious, first of all, if you felt like that really gave you a really solid foundation for what you were doing next. And then the second thing that occurred to me is I think it'd be really helpful. What kinds of things really gave you clues that it was time to move on? Like, how did you know? What was that calling like, the experience of it, so that people can kind of look and listen for that in their own lives?
Yes, absolutely. And I do believe, so my own belief is that purpose, you don't find purpose, you discover it. And when you discover it, you realize it's always been there. It just wasn't as pronounced. So even as a young girl growing up in a family of 9, being the youngest, there was always something that was, and people used to say this, they would say, oh my goodness, you're different. But I was older, I was more mature than most of my the kids I grew up with. I always had a different way of thinking about things, but it was all about service and helping other people. And I had a deep compassion for helping other people. So it showed up early on, but I didn't know what it was. I was just being who I was, right? And when I was in corporate, and as I look back, you're right, there are always evidence. So I've always been that type of person that would see the best in somebody else and was willing and always putting myself out there to help them. So I did mentoring, I did coaching, all those kinds of things. I worked really with my team in how to structure what they were doing, or just to be that trusted advisor, if you will. Well, all of that. And then I always had this perspective that people used to say was different. And I'll give you a really quick story. And it was like my vision of how I saw things, because I would see things further down the line and almost to conclusion, and then could back up. And oftentimes when I would make suggestions or put strategies together, one of the things that I had to learn, I had to shift and cut it into really, really small, and we call them chunks, right? Little chunks, because I could see further down the road than most people could. And they couldn't get there. So I had to become very skilled at bringing them along. Well, in all the things that I did with corporate, a lot of that stuff I now do with my clients. It's all about being strategically aligned with that purpose. And I led initiatives to align our brand with our values and equity. It was called brand equity. Or ethics. So I led the ethics department, all those things. So my point is you're right. There were stepping stones all along the way that allowed me to really hone in. And as my job began to change, it became a misalignment. It became a misalignment with who I really needed to be. And I believe that it was a call to be more of that. And so that was the what I call the tug on the inside, that something was calling me to do more, but on a bigger scale. And so, so that's what it felt like to me. I just felt misaligned in my spirit with not with what I was doing, because I worked in healthcare, and my responsibility was making sure that we had programs for federal employees. We took care of their health. And our saying used to be, or our slogan used to be, whenever you need us, we're there. And that I took to heart. And that was what I lived and breathed every day, is that when you call us, we're going to be there for you. We got you covered. That was our slogan. We got you covered. Well, that's not very different than what I do now and when I work with my clients. So when I work with my clients, I'm really helping them to get centered on who they've always been. They just didn't recognize it and didn't know what to call it or how to focus on it. Because there are certain things that we do that gives us great high energy, and some things that are draining our energy. And that's another way in which you can be very intuitive in learning that, is what's really being that catalyst for change in you and how you are serving other people. Because I do think purpose is about serving.
That's awesome. I have a similar experience to that, where there was a time where I was working in a Fortune 500 company, and then, we're raised to kind of think, oh yeah, that's the epitome of going out and getting your career. You're working for this great company. You got a solid reputation, solid foundation. And whenever I was in that kind of a role, I always found myself resonating more with the facilitator and educator type of management, rather than the boss, dictating, you do this, you do that, listen to what I say, all that kind of stuff. And so whenever I was in the management training, there was this style where you actually set people up for success by giving them all the resources and tools and training that they need, but you don't really micromanage their day-to-day activities. And that's what I always resonated with, is helping people be the most successful that they could be, which I can totally relate to when you're talking about that you really gravitate more toward the coaching and everything, trying to empower people. And I had that same kind of inclination. But I did really find it was interesting looking back. I learned a lot about leadership, and I learned a lot about communication in that role. So I think it did really prep me for a lot of future things that I did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I said, I don't believe that we find our purpose. I believe it's discovered, but it's always a part of who we are. And even as I look at my daughter and I think about how protective she was as a small child, and she's always been the type of person who latched on to other people, and particularly if they seemed somewhat vulnerable, in that she wanted to protect them. So if it was the new girl at school, she would be the first one to befriend her and take her under her wing to show her around. So fast forward to today, she is very, with all the events that are happening today, she is very involved and committed and convicted from her very soul of what's right and what's justice. And when I look at her now and I think about when she was little, it was the same way. It was that same energy and that ability to want to do what was right and wanted everybody to be treated right. And so that's why I say it's who we are from birth on. It's just when we allow ourselves to focus on it and really get a sense of what it is. So.
Well, and I think, Jena, what I loved about your story is you didn't, when you made your switch, because like you said, you felt a little misaligned. You didn't wait for the 2x4 or the big wake up call, like, a car accident or, a lot of people, what happens, I find, is they sense what you did, like, oh, something's not right, but they don't have the courage to make the change. And so then they continue, and then life says, okay, you didn't get that wake up call, so we're going to make it a little bit more intense. And they have, some life altering experience, like, a car crash or an illness or something like that. And I think that, in my view, in terms of helping people get aligned with their purpose, we need to get to that point where we don't have to have, the 2x4 wake up call that's pretty unpleasant. We can just feel that little nudging that something's out of alignment, and then make an adjustment.
Mm-hmm. And I should probably just clarify one thing. So I didn't have those major life altering experiences like illness. I've been very, very fortunate that I've not had to encounter any of this. But what I did encounter was I which is part of my platform now, and why and I'll circle back to that. But is that I recognized early at a certain point in my life that my marriage was not what it needed to be, right? And I was really afraid to leave. Um, and for a host of reasons, but one being my faith, because I believed that I was supposed to stay married, right? And then I reached a point in my life where I knew that I had to leave. So I had to make that decision. And it was again, it was a misalignment of my spirit, but I had to leave. So I got out of that. And then, unfortunately, but fortunately, my job ended unexpectedly, right? And it ended, but about a year before that or 2 years before that is when I started feeling really like I was complete, like my role there had been completed, like I needed to do something else. But because I was going through the divorce and so forth, I wasn't ready to leave that comfort. I needed that comfort, right? And so one day the job ended unexpectedly. And so it just threw me in a tailwind. But when I left, I had no hostility, I had no resentment, and I actually thanked them because I had a very long and a successful career with them, and I met some phenomenal people. So I could not discard that because I then knew, and this was all part of my spiritual awakening, was that I then knew that I was being prepared for something bigger. And so, exactly uh, 3 years to the date, right, when I left the job, I was then standing on the stage in South Africa giving a speech to 2,500 international entrepreneurs talking about purpose, right? And talking about faith. And I tell you what was so serene about it and so spiritual is that as I got on stage, my speech changed and I began to speak totally different than what I had prepared. But I got a standing ovation, and then I had women crying in the audience. And when they came up to me afterwards, the first thing that they said, "Thank you. You are the only one that we've ever heard talk and be courageous to bring up her faith." And I said, that's because faith is what got me here. And so we built a relationship, and leaving out of that, I had 3 prophets to come up to me, and none of them knew that the other one had talked to me, and they all said the same thing. So I knew that it was all divine and what had happened and what I needed to be. And then 8, 9 months from that date, well, 11 months, I was there in South Africa conducting my own women's conference. And so that's just, I think, the shift that occurs when you are willing to step into that purpose, accept it, and then move forward. So I say you have to hear it, and then you have to step forward in it. And I was willing to do that. And that's what's now led to some of the, what I think are some of the just amazing things for me that have happened in my life over the last 5 years. And so I just, wow, it's amazing in how our souls can connect.
Well, yeah. And so let's talk about, I'm intrigued that you have started what you call the Purpose Driven Women's Movement, which is obviously definitely needed today. So tell us about that and why you feel it's so important to aid others to find their purpose now that you've found yours.
I believe as and while I focus on women for a number of reasons, and because it's my own story, right? And as I realize that as women, we sometimes or oftentimes we give everything we have to everybody else, to our careers, to our families, to our husbands, to our children. And oftentimes we don't reserve enough for us. And we end up giving from a cup that's actually empty because we're not pouring back into ourselves. But we give so much that at some point in our lives, we wake up and realize that there's something more for us. And we've worked on everybody else's dreams. And so, but women are so nurturing. And when I was in New York at a meeting sponsored by global leaders from the UN, one of the speakers got up before I spoke and said, women make the best leaders, the best leaders. The one thing that holds them back more than anything, forget about all of the, marginalization that we as women sometimes face, is their lack of confidence. And it's that lack of confidence that can stop them from moving forward in a way that is huge, right? And I took that and I decided, and what came to me was if we have more women who are willing to step into their purpose, that women change things. I don't care where you put us, whether it's in our family, whether it's in our corporate environment, in schools, in any environment you put most women in, we end up changing things and making an impact. And so what I began to understand is that the more women that step into their purpose, the more changes in society, in communities can take place. And when she's economically independent, she's going to make far better decisions and not be held back because she doesn't have the financial wherewithal to move with agility to make the type of changes that she's been created to be. So that spawned the purpose-driven woman movement, because I believe that when we all come together as purpose-driven women, we become like this rising tide, and that tide begins to change everything in our midst. And particularly in today's environment with everything going on, she's needed. And there are so many things out there that need solving that I believe that purpose-driven woman has an answer to. And so that's really what initiated, and it's about igniting that purpose in every woman who's willing to step up and make that mark that she's been created to make. Because I believe we all have it, and we've all been designed for that. Some of us will make a small mark, some of us will make a big mark, but it's a mark to be made.
Wow. Yeah. And Jen, I can totally relate to the struggle with lack of self-confidence, because I had that for many, many years. Sometimes I still feel it rearing its head now and then. And, one of the things that I teach when I look at life purpose is that we have lessons, all of us do, and if we don't take care of those lessons, they can actually block us from fully giving our purpose, our gifts and talents. And I think self-confidence is a huge one, because if we don't tackle that, it can definitely be a stumbling block that prevents us from sharing whatever gifts and talents we have.
Exactly. And you're so right. And even, and just like your transparency, and sometimes it wears its head. It wears its head for me too. And I know what I have to do. I know what I'm being called to do. But there's always that voice that says, not yet. Oh, you don't know enough. You're not good enough, and all that. And and that's why the support system is so needed, because we get a chance, because you might see things in me that I don't see yet, or I might see something in you that you don't see yet. But together we begin to see a lot, right? And it's so much that we can do, and so much in society and stereotypes have told us that, we have to compete with one another, and we don't. Because when we're purpose driven, our light shines and we just become multiple beams of light that will never cancel out or dim someone else's light. So you and I can be purpose driven. We can talk about purpose. We can teach purpose, but you and I will never dim each other's light. We just become greater beacons of light for the people that we serve. And I think that's really my message, and why so often women, it happened to me in the corporate world, right? And it's like crabs in a barrel, like, because society has said it's not enough for you, right? You got to compete. Well, guess what? We live in a world of full abundance. So we can have all that God has intended us to have, and never take anything away from each other. And I think that's the beauty of purpose, because purpose it's really more from a spiritual base than anything.
Well, yes. And I always say, there's no two people with the same fingerprints. And likewise,
yes,
everybody has a slightly different purpose. It may be similar, but there's no way we could have the exact same purpose, because we come from different backgrounds, different past lives, on and on and on. So we're going to cover more of that in the second half, Jenna. We're going to take a quick break, but right before we go on that break, would you share how folks could get in touch with you and your marvelous movement?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. And what you can do, so anybody that's interested, not only can you follow me on social media, but what I've done is, if you will simply just text the word purpose driven.
All right.
Is it still on? I hear the music.
Yep, that's all right. We will come back to that right after
good.
the break. You are currently listening to Spirit's Journey on Truth Frequency Radio and Oneness Talk Radio. We will see you on the other side.
No hate, no hype, no fear. We are DFR, your protection from deception.
Back from the break. If you were just joining us, this is Spirit's Journey with Patrick and Kathryn Andries, coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and Oneness Talk Radio, among others. We are here today with Dr. Jena Bell, talking about purpose-driven life, especially her movement with purpose-driven women.
And Dr. Jena, I'm sorry we got cut off at the break. You were telling folks how they can join the movement.
Yes, absolutely. So if they would just say, for anybody that's interested in that's listening and want to join the movement is about women coming together, supporting each other to make sure that we step into that purpose and make the mark that we've been called to make. But it's about support and gaining resources that you might need along that journey. So you can simply text the word purpose driven to 415-417-0817. I'll say it again, 415-417-0817. And you'll receive a link, and you just click on the link and join us in our private Facebook group. And then from there will be introductions, and you can join the other women there that have joined the movement already. And I believe it's going to grow even more, because my goal is to empower 1 million women. And I just see this strong force of women from around the globe who are making a difference in the world, whether it's in their community, their church, their family, their offices, or whether it's on a grander scale. Because I do believe that we've been called differently, but we've all been called to purpose. So
And I love how you talked about women being special, that we have this nurturing ability. And I also, I hear so many people, and I agree, and I'd love your take on this, that, we have this intuitive feminine energy, which seems to be lacking a lot in the world. And so I think one of the keys for women, and that we have so much to offer, is that we have an easier time than men. I'm not saying all men, but a lot, to tap into that intuitive call that knows, should I do this or should I do that? Because we're more in touch with the emotion, that subconscious inner level, which makes a huge difference when we make decisions. It's coming from more of the soul perspective than the outer conscious mind, where a lot of men are just like, okay, how am I going to make the next 100,000? Where women, it's more like, well, what does my intuition say? What would you say about that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, you're absolutely right. And I like to say it's almost like that sixth sense, that gut intuition that has us thinking about it on a different level. Because when we approach situations, when we approach issues in life, we look for resolution. So it's like, what's at what this is just a symptom, but what's the real issue that we really need to think about and to put in changes? And most women, because we are so nurturing, and we tend to also think more holistically about issues. And so, because of that, I think it makes us um, a different kind of leader. Let me say that. I would say a different kind of leader in any situation. And you just think about women who, whether we have children or not, I've met very few women over my lifetime that cannot see a child and instantly feel something for that child, whether they have a child or not, because it's instinctive, that our ability to want to take care of our environment. So it just brings a total different perspective, but also that sixth sense and that heart-centered approach to do the right thing.
Now, I'd like to dive a little bit deeper here, because you mentioned a couple of times in the first half that we have a purpose that we discover. That's not something that we create. And in our experience, the purpose is something that we actually have a voice in forming before this lifetime, but it is something that we create before this lifetime. And so I was just curious on your perspective. Do you feel like the purpose is something that's more divinely appointed that we discover during our life, and that we find it, that, or is it something that we have a hand in maybe forming that before we come into this life?
So that's going to go into a level probably that I'm not that steeped in, but this is what I believe. I approach it from this perspective. I believe that there is we've all been divinely created, that there's a higher source, and that source is God, and God has created us, and he's created us for a specific purpose, an assignment. Long before we're born, that assignment is on our lives, and that our lives then become a manifestation of that. And how we sometimes get distracted from that is because of all the things that we learn, or things that we are exposed to, or sometimes growing up, we know that some of those things that appear to be gifts, or our orientation towards certain things, we can have society, we can have parents, we can have friends that sway us away from that. So if you have a child who's always talking, or always into things, right? Most parents, most people will say, well, stop talking. You talk too much. You do that. That we start putting boundaries on the child when those are gifts that are beginning to emerge, because those gifts are directly tied to what that purpose is, and where the formation and the creation comes in, and the will that we have is how we now choose that path of creating or manifesting, if you will, that purpose. So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about, is that I believe that my true purpose is a healer. It's healing, and it's really helping others to see way beyond themselves so that they operate at the highest level of who they've been created to be, and igniting that purpose in them. Well, how I do that, I'm creating, right? Because God has now opened up a window of creativity, and all the gifts, the talents that I have and the skills that I've acquired, I now can create different roles, so that the roles that we play in our lives are mere manifestations of that assignment that we were created for. So now, how that gets influenced, I do believe that while I don't follow astrology and the past lives, those paths, they're very interesting to me. But I believe that there are definitely interactions. And so that, and Kathryn, I love the way you described it in your book. And but I see them as influences, that those are influences over that purpose in our lives. And so there is some connectivity there. I just come from it from a more spiritual faith base, that I believe that God has created that and created that purpose for us, so that when we're born, there is a unique assignment on our lives, and it becomes evident with us over time.
Yeah, I like the way you describe that. And one of the things that I talk to people about sometimes, it doesn't really matter if they believe in past lives or not, because like the key point that you talked about is that we have this purpose within us, regardless of how you believe that it got there. And one of the things that I really keyed in on when you were talking is that there are so many influences in our lives distracting us from that, because there's all these things trying to get our attention. It's people in our lives trying to, get us to follow their path or their idea of what we should be doing. It's our own distractions, getting distracted by money or all these different things that might pull us away from our path. So it's all about quieting our mind down and really listening within and picking up that little voice that's almost like a whisper, kind of saying, this is what you really intended to be doing. This is your path that you're really intended to be on this lifetime. And it's getting kind of cutting through all that noise, so to speak, to find that little quiet voice that's guiding you along the way.
Absolutely. And I love the way you describe it. And it's a sense of stillness that has to occur. And one of the things that I do with, I do destination retreats. And one of the goals of that retreat is to have the individuals to reconnect to nature and to find that sense of stillness, so that they can quieten all the noise and the distractions, and that other little voice that's telling you, you need to be doing X, versus really hearing and connecting with yourself, connecting with that purpose on the inside of you. And just the way this whole, how can I say it? We've been conditioned in America, and it's a capitalistic society that says that there is this American dream, or whether you're in a different country, but it's this dream of life that you should be seeking, that's filled with all these material things. And so you spend your life just really trying to get those material things, only to realize that those material things never created happiness for you. That's not the essence of your abundance. Is that abundance and that fulfillment comes from something far greater. Because when the material possessions are gone, you still got to be with yourself. You still got to be happy. And so if you look to find joy in those material things, then you will miss it, and it'll always be temporary. And what my own experience has shown is that my joy comes from nothing, right, of that I possess, except from what I possess on the inside, and my faith. That's where the source of my joy comes. And So anybody that's putting all of their happiness and their joy tied to the things in their lives, although those things are great, and I'll never, tell people don't get those. I'm just saying that they're not your source of joy, and if they are, then it's going to be temporary. But it's that quietness that you're talking about, Patrick, that is just so critical.
Well, and I think everybody has their own definitions of success, whether it's, a certain amount of money or,
Mm-hmm.
but whatever, regardless of what, you think success is, you obviously have done an amazing amount of work in influencing people. And what I wanted to ask you is, do you think you have been able to reach so many women and have such a broad impact because as you formulated your purpose-driven women's movement, from what I can tell, you have really fashioned it around a higher vision than just, I'm Jena Bell and I want to make $100,000 this year or $5. It's like, that's not your purpose. It seems like you have attached to a greater vision of wanting to help 1 million women. And would you say that what has led you to your broad influence and success?
I really believe that, because I think that the financial rewards come when you are doing the right things, because people will eventually pay, people will pay you for what you're worth. But that's not my goal. My goal is to help women to make that mark, because ultimately when we are making that mark, we are changing lives. We are changing society. We are making the world a better place. And I think a lot of people just identify with that, because most of us want to know that our lives have meant something. So whether it's helping one child, or whether it's helping 1 million children, or whether it's helping, it's whatever that is that you're supposed to be doing, right? But that gives us so many rewards. But at the end of that reward is that you are helping to build a better world, a better place, a better community. And that's what it's all about for me. And that's why I think when I created the brand Purpose on the Rise, I said it's not just a brand, it's a call to action, because it's calling people to do what you have been purposed to do. And when you do this, our communities change, our world changes, we become better humans, right? And the environment, like I when I was in South Africa, I was talking, and I said, there are a lot of issues that are impacting South Africa right now. But there's a woman right here in this room who has a solution. And sure enough, there was a woman who had been trying to start she wanted to clean the water system so that the children at schools would not be impacted by water that was not healthy, that would ruin their health. And she was 16 years old, and she had that vision. You see what I'm saying? So just imagine she's stepping into the right place, getting the right support system, getting the right financing. When she does that, she's impacting thousands of children and their health for generations to come. That's what I see. That's why this is so urgent to me, because our society around the globe is calling for that, and is calling for people who are heart-centered and will be doing it for the right reasons. So
that's powerful. Yeah. So that brings me to a broader question, because that's a really good example leading into this broader question, because there's so much going on today. I mean, we've got the coronavirus pandemic, we've got protests, we've got a lot of attention being brought to the racial inequalities that still exist, that, calls for justice. So how does purpose play into, shaping the world and shaping the lives of, considering everything that's happening today?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question, because this has been a tug for me like no other, right? Because I know that there is something that we have to do that's different. Excuse me, I apologize for that.
Yep, symptom of today's technological world, right?
Yeah, that's what happens when you're live. And so I apologize for that.
No, that's all right. We're just being real on the air today.
Real on the air, right? So, but anyway, 'cause I thought I had it down. But what I was saying is that there's so much that's going on, and when you think about the racial strife that we're in the midst of, but something is very different about this time that says that there's a whole new awakening for the world, that the pandemic allowed us to do, Patrick and Kathryn, what we just talked about, is to get quiet and to get still. And because the world was put on pause, we are now seeing things that have been going on for years, for centuries, but we never really concentrated on it. And now you have people who are looking at it and looking at it in a totally, totally different way. And it's because of that that we now can make a difference. And so for each of us that are purpose driven, it's now our time to step up and do what we have been called to do so that we can make a mark and we can change the trajectory of our society around the globe. And we can do all of the important things that we need to do. Hold on just 1 second. I just have to send this message because I think it might be it's my daughter.
All right.
You know, while you're doing that, one of the things I was going to add is that I feel a lot of the unhappiness in the world is because people are not living their purpose. You know, it's like if you were here to be a leader and you're in this job where you have no potential to be a leader, you don't even like the work that you're doing, it's not in alignment with your soul, you're going to be miserable. And then you're going to start, you know, doing all kinds of things, acting out or playing the victim, or, you know, there's many ways that we can play out our unhappiness. So my thought is, you know, all the problems out there in the world are symptoms of something deeper. And I think when we're aligned with our purpose, when we're doing what we really came here to do, we're happy. We don't want to inflict, you know, pain or problems on other people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the greatest ways we can change the world is if everybody has the ability to really do what they came here to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I want to just comment on that to expand on that, because I think that the things that we're seeing in our society today, and, you know, let's just be honest, but we have to begin to have conversations. We have to be courageous to have these conversations, and we have to be able to change and move so that the systems of oppression that have existed for all these years can finally be resolved. And I just think that right now that those that are purpose driven are now being called to lead in a way in which they've never led before, because they are coming from a heart-centered perspective, and so that their vision is bigger, their view from the top, that's what I like to say, is very different. And so your ability to affect change that needs to be done will reverberate around the globe when we do that. And we have to do it. It is just so imperative, because as we look at the state of the pandemic, it's no longer business as usual, because business can't be conducted as usual. And when you see the people on the protesting, these young people, it's because they want a better world for themselves and for everybody. And so we as adults need to participate in that and doing what we're doing. So that's where this whole purpose driven, I like to say, it's a perfect storm, is that you've been quieted. You now see what you haven't seen before. You hear what you haven't heard before. And now it's time to act in ways in which you've never before. And to be following that purpose and stepping into that allows you a greater platform, and there's a greater sense of responsibility. So that's why I think that we can actually change things if we are willing and courageous enough to step up.
So if somebody's trying to define their purpose that they came here to do. Like, how would you define purpose for somebody so that they could really understand how to kind of shape that idea of what their purpose is?
That purpose, the way I define it, is that purpose is that uh, confluence of the passion that you have inside of you, the gifts and talents that have now been part of the provision of what's resonating with you on the inside, in your gut, in your tuition, that tells you. Like, I was on a show the other day, and I was telling there is something that's calling you right now. In a way, it's pulling, it's tugging. You know that there's something on the inside, and when you can get quiet and discover what that is and what it's telling you, but it's that pull that's really your pull to greatness, and but it's part of who you've always been. It's part of that little, what I call pull that you have had to certain issues, or the way that you think, or it almost defines who you've always been. It's a defining moment for you, and so that's the way I kind of describe it. But I will tell you this: as I've worked with people, clients, one of the things is that it never came to us a surprise.
Yeah.
To a surprise to them. It's like, I've always been like that. I've always wanted to do that. I've always done that. But maybe society said you shouldn't do it. Or maybe, you were in a work environment where you couldn't fully express and do those things. But it's always there. It's always been there. You just haven't heard it, or you haven't really allowed it to evolve itself within.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that too. A lot of the work I do is just confirmation. It's like, oh yeah, I just needed somebody to validate that, I'm on the right path, because as we talked about in the beginning of the show, so many women in particular lack the self-confidence. We may hear a little voice in our head saying, you're here to be a famous actress. And of course, our confidence is like, yeah, right, you'll never do that. But when somebody else validates that, and it's like, oh, well, maybe I can do that. And so you mentioned, Jena, that you do retreats. And I wondered, what other programs do you offer? Because we're just about ready to close up the show here in about a minute. Other quick programs you want to mention, and a last call on how to get in touch with you.
Yes. And so I do one-on-one coaching. I work with women and women entrepreneurs, as well as organizations, to help them to discover what that purpose is. And once they discover that, we connect and we create an alignment strategy so that their lives, their businesses are all aligned with that purpose. Because what we want is to be in full alignment so that we're operating at our highest vibration and highest energy level. And so I do the one-on-one coaching. I have a coaching program that is called Purpose on the Rise. And it's a one-on-one coaching, but I also do group coaching. And then I do the destination retreats in Costa Rica. So as soon as the travel restrictions are lifted and we can get back to some sense of normalcy, those destination retreats.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Dr. Jena. So once again, there's a Facebook group. She's got Purpose Driven Women on Facebook, the group. There's also purposeontherise.com. This has been Spirit's Journey on Oneness Talk Radio and Truth Frequency Radio. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Kathryn. Have an amazing week. We'll